Okay, let's get started. It feels good to say that again after so many live videos. It's good to be back to doing edited videos. I'm sure Danny is going to enjoy doing a lot of these videos. She loves editing. She was an enormous part of what gave Our Painted Lives our identity through edited videos. So I'm super, super happy that we can go back to what started Our Painted Lives, which were reflections about painting that we tried to translate into exercises. So for our comeback, and I think this is going to be a constant throughout the year, we thought it'd be cool if we could rescue a theme that we had done in the past, and we could do it throughout the year, which is, what can I learn from? And I think that particular exercise proved to be really, really helpful for me. Whenever I think of an artist, and not only think of, how powerful their work is and how moving it is, but also how it can translate into something that can alter my paintings, let's say, that can have an influence or an effect on my paintings. I think that mindset is super, super interesting because it does make you realize, yes, these people that surround you are geniuses, and you're very, very grateful for having so many talented people doing so many amazing things. But immediately you realize, well, what does that also mean for my work? Is it permeating my work? Do I allow it to have any sort of effect? Whenever I encounter an artist that's doing something that moves me, that touches me, do I expect that to have an immediate say on what I do with my own work? I think that those sort of reflections are wonderful for artists to have. I think that's part of growth. And I think that that's a sort of a surreptitious way of creating like this very tight-knit community, because sometimes influences are very, very quiet. Sometimes they're very loud and they can be very apparent and very evident. Sometimes, not in the best of cases, they can be quite superficial. But ideally, as an artist, you want to figure out what it means to be respectful of someone and what it means to look up to someone. And I think that when we were doing those videos of what can I learn from, which we did of Rembrandt and Caravaggio, it was really interesting for me to realize that I can't, and I'll never try to paint like either Rembrandt or Caravaggio. That was never the point. I think that from a technical standpoint, if you want to learn from them, if you have the opportunity to live in a city where you have access to a museum that allows master copies, you can go and stand in front of Rembrandts and Caravaggios and just study them for weeks and weeks and weeks. And I think that that's fascinating too. I did that when I was living in New York, and I would go to the Met and I copied a couple of Rembrandts, and it was an incredible experience. But I think that it's a little bit different when you start to imagine how an artist can have a say on what you do with your own personal work. Sometimes we're super protective about our work, and we do not allow anything to come in. We think of it as something that is so precious that we just want to protect it and nurture it, and we don't want to bring it into the savage outer world so it can be corrupted. So I know that there's a lot of stands regarding this, but I'm a sort of painter that is usually very open. I'm open-hearted, open-minded. I'm willing to have an experience. I think one of the reasons that I enjoy a very broad art scene is because I'm always willing to play. I think I am the sort of observer that says, you know what, you've convinced me. Whenever I see a work of art that is powerful, I immediately put my arms down and I'm like, I'm yours. Do with me what you want. I'm willing to play by your rules. This is your playground. I'm just here for the ride. I honestly think that so many good things can come out of having like an open mindset, that I still respect people that are very set in their own ways and that believe that they have a very clear path and they don't like to stray from that path. And they've known that from when they were very young. But I do think that there's a ton of enjoyment out there in the art world. And I want to believe that I'm willing to experience the best of what the art world has to offer to me. Now, even though we had spoken about how to understand the influences that a couple of Baroque artists could have in my own current work, I thought it best if we could look at a contemporary artist and see how somebody who I consider a peer and who I consider just incredibly talented can have a say on my work and what I see in their work that may or may not influence what I do. So for this first video, I thought of SAINER ETAM. I think SAINER is a tremendous, tremendous artist. Starting from him being just a beast of urban painting, mural paintings that are fascinating. Him and his crew just do an incredible job at that. But also the easel painter that is SAINER, and the sketchbook artist that is SAINER. As someone described Rembrandt, the very sweat of his brain. I'm an enormous, enormous fan of his easel painting, let's say his studio painting. And I also think he is just an amazing colorist. I think he's one of the best colorists in terms of people that are working in contemporary figurative painting. I certainly think that SAINER is just somebody who is a joy to see in terms of like the risks he takes and the way in which he just barrels over color, because he is completely unafraid but totally in control, which is something that I've always believed is a great sign of a great artist. When you can see somebody being in control but very, very bold at the same time, I think that's just the best of both worlds. I think that is somebody who's been trained, who is disciplined, but is also willing to let go and kind of let that animal part of the artist, that beastly part of the artist, go through and shine through. When I was looking at SAINER's work, it's important for me because I am a painter who considers himself deep down a tonalist. So I am probably the opposite end of the spectrum in terms of what SAINER does currently with his color work. So one could argue that there is very little that I could do with all this amazing information that is coming out of a SAINER painting, because I would be betraying my soul. I would be going against this vein that I have, this kind of natural order that I've already established in my own work, where I just adore painting with controlled palettes, compressed value scales. I mean, that is my bread and butter. And it's not something that I go back to because I think it's successful. I think it's something I go back to because it's something I just deeply connect to. I think that that is part of my DNA. I think I've discovered that throughout the years, and I don't fight it. I just go with it. And I say, well, I think that's me. I think I found who I am. And many times I'm not willing to question that because I feel that there's a lot of peace in saying, I think I'm here. I'm home. I finally found the voice that I was looking for. And that is very comforting. But I also think, and this is another facet that I have, that a part of what makes me the artist that I am is curiosity. Because I always feel that I'm missing something. And I have this itch to want to experience other things that I may be missing. Every time I see a cool artist working, I always imagine myself in another lifetime having taken a separate road, thinking that that could have been a very happy timeline for me, that I would have been a fulfilled artist, but doing completely different work. So a lot of times it happens with me in terms of like my love for comic books and graphic novels. And I always imagine, what would my life look like if I would have taken that detour, that decision when I was younger to stay in comic books, to attempt to be a comic book artist. And there's other lives where I wanted to do special effects and I wanted to do sculpting and molding. I sometimes imagine what would my life look like if I would have been a sculptor. I do have this part of my brain that is always kind of wanting to live those experiences. And what I've noticed with myself is that I don't really need a broad experience to enjoy it. And I don't mean to describe it as something that I could just tick off my bucket list. Not really. When I have these smaller experiences, let's say, these very kind of short-lived experiences, I really, really feel that I went through something that was significant. And I really feel that that experience, even if it was short, even if it was finite, and even if it doesn't represent an important amount of time in the grand scheme of my painting life, it is relevant there are things that I can learn from it. I constantly want to learn things from my experiences. I devour the knowledge that comes from good paintings, mediocre paintings, bad paintings. I love it. I love all of it. I want to go through all of it because I think that all of it is just feeding this relationship that I have with painting. So even if it's a week or 2 weeks worth of daily exercises where I crash into this unknown experience, I want to go through it. I think that that's a fascinating impulse of being an artist. So whenever I look at SAINER's work, I'm always baffled as to how this very scattered way of painting, of understanding color, can have an impact on me. And I call it scattered because I think SAINER represents pretty much a current painter. And by a current painter, I mean a painter that's being influenced by everything. You can completely see, like a digital influence on SAINER's work. You can see an influence of screens, which in my case has led me to try to imagine what I could do in my own painting if I were to try to interpret these colors that come from screens, enormous gamuts, these super, super wide gamuts that come out of your OLED HDR TVs, which are bombarding your eyes with so much rich information that I always tell myself, how will painting deal with this? And how will my own painting deal with this? And I always feel my stance is probably like, becoming a bit of a hermit, taking myself outside of this equation and becoming sort of a watcher of sorts, just enjoying everything that is happening, but from a distance. And because I feel I'm separated a little bit from the art world, then I can find refuge and I can feel comfortable doing what I love to do, which is kind of small little paintings. And I call them small because I don't think they speak about bigness. I don't think they speak about a bigger world. I don't think they speak about an outer world. I very much think they speak about my everyday life, but not even about actions in my everyday life. It's not even about like an active everyday life. It's more about the stillness and the smallness of my life. And I like that. But there's always a time where even though I am a watcher, I want to step inside of this hyper-chromatic world, hyper-saturated world, and see how that can influence me. And whenever I see SAINER's work, I see what he does with chroma, with light and shadow, because he is fantastic. I think one of the things that he does, which is tremendously genius, is that he can keep high chroma everywhere. He can keep high chroma in his light. He can keep high chroma in his midtones. He can keep high chroma in his shades. Even within the transitioning between those tones, he also finds saturation. And it's so intelligent. His color choices are so intelligent. I hope people can take their time to really look at SAINER's work and realize how deeply intelligent, how very, very bright a mind he has in terms of color relationships and the boldness of his color relationships. There is so much courage, but it also feels like, let's go for it, let's try this out, which is, again, just this beautiful balance because it's an educated guess or a ton of preparation, a ton of underlying control, but in the moment of execution, you just let go. And letting go doesn't mean that you're doing like a really overly expressive painting or overly loose painting. I mean, there's tons and tons of really well thought design and composition in his work. I think a ton of his mural work is exemplified by that, but just the activation of that space with just beautiful compositions. So whenever I see that apparent carelessness that produces such magical results, I'm like, okay, how can I get some of that? Like, I want to bottle some of that genius and I want to drink from it because that's something that I want in my own painting. I mean, who wouldn't want to be that talented? But in my case, it's how do you do that? Here I am in my little gray world where I'm super happy. I'm a little hobbit that is hiding and painting. Nobody is bothering me. I do my gray little paintings of my gray little corner of the world. But whenever I open my heart and open my mind and let things in, you get super anxious and you say, like, how is this going to alter my painting? You know, am I going to be the same painter after this? Am I going to be able and willing to sacrifice some of the things that I hold sacred if I let these very, very powerful things in? And I think that that's, you know, the beautiful part of really being influenced by somebody, of attempting to understand how their efforts in their life can be significant to your life. What I have to do, you know, and this is in practical terms, what I have to do within my own painting is force myself, because I notice that it won't happen naturally. It won't happen gradually. It won't happen seamlessly. No, I have to force myself. So what does it mean to force yourself? Well, it means that you have to change the variables which you work with. You have to find the things that are always a constant, and you have to take them away. For the latter part of last year, I was very comfortable painting with a really, really compressed earthy palette that I adore. It was made up of titanium white, yellow ochre, sometimes cad red, but not really, earth red, and I use terra rosa for my earth red, raw umber, and ivory black. So if you think about it, that's just an earth palette. That is, you know, me wanting to be a painter 250,000 years ago, and just like scavenging for rocks that I can pulverize and I can paint with. That is what I want to feel with my own work. I would say that in the second semester of 2023, I was becoming very, very empowered by this very primitive, let's call it, palette. I absolutely adore it, and I don't think I'll be able to let go of it, because I do think there's a ton of answers hidden in there for me and for my own painting. So I know that that's a fountain that I'm going to go back to constantly. But in attempting to understand how to let SAINER in, I have to force myself to say, okay, you are a significant part of my painting, you know, new earthy palette that I just discovered, but I'm going to put you to the side, and I'm going to bring back palettes that I've worked with, which have become somewhat familiar, but I can tell you that every time I put those colors down, it feels like a dissonant note in my life. Everything is in harmony, and suddenly a cat walks through all the piano keys. That's how it feels for me to introduce this particular palette, which in this case is a titanium white. Then I wasn't quite using bismuth yellow, but essentially for people that don't want to use bismuth yellow or can't get bismuth yellow, it's pretty much like a cadmium lemon yellow color. Don't worry if you don't have specifically bismuth yellow. You can use other yellows that play the same role. For my red, I have my quinacridone magenta. And then I have my cobalt teal or cobalt turquoise, I feel. I mean, they're kind of the same. They're this, you know, very opaque, kind of lighter blue-green. It's not as tinting or as covering as you may think. It's actually a color that lends itself to be handled somewhat well. So even though it looks gaudy, it looks really horrible, it is a far gentler color than what it looks like. But that's the palette that I put down. It's a palette that I've had kind of scattered experiences with. But I thought it'd be really best to bring it back when looking at SAINER's work and looking at the sort of hodgepodge manner in which he composes and he places elements in his paintings and he places colors in his paintings. It's not haphazard and it's not random at all. Of course not. All great artists have a tremendous amount of control within their own work. But I do also want to acknowledge that there is a sort of rabbit hole feel to what he does, where you begin your day searching for something, and at night you find yourself in places that you don't even recognize yourself. So I think that there is that quality to his work, like a flow to the unknown, and just like picking up pieces from that traveling, from that journey. For me, there's a little bit of that whenever I call back this palette. It's like, yes, you're familiar, but every time I go to this palette and I try to use it, it's like, woof. It just feels like a completely different universe, and I feel like a completely different painter. What I tried to do technically in this painting, which was very, very tough, was tell myself, I'm going to, yes, do a drawing like you saw me do at the beginning, But I told myself, I'm not going to try to follow that drawing tightly. I'm not going to create boundaries for me if what I'm trying to do is learn from these very highly chromatic paintings. The other more fundamental thing, and it's one thing that's really, really hard for me to break from, is the fact that I use an open palette, that I just mix paint openly in my palette. What that means is that I never, or very, very, very rarely, pre-mix color. That's something that a lot of people do, and for sure that would be something that would exhibit the hue range that this palette has to offer, because this is a high chroma yellow, high chroma magenta, and a high chroma blue-green that, if I start pre-mixing hues, I would be shocked with the amount of information that I could get from this palette. In all fairness, I think I would be overwhelmed. So I think that my decision to paint with an open palette, it sounds strange, but even though it is way more chaotic than pre-mixing paint, I think it provides me with a degree of control that I don't feel when I pre-mix paint. I know it sounds kind of backwards, but I'm just so comfortable having like a pool of color that I can make subtle variations from, that's something that I haven't been totally willing to sacrifice. But maybe that's the step that I have to take. Maybe that's the next step. So we'll see if we could do that in next videos. So keeping a drawing loose, keeping an open palette, those are things that I was going to do. And I told myself, because I'm going to keep my drawing loose, because I'm going to keep an open palette, I'm going to break form down. I'm going to try not to think a lot about form. So even though I want to describe Dani, I'm not going to think about describing her through form. I'm not going to think of, okay, I'm painting Dani's nose, I'm painting Dani's mouth, I'm painting Dani's eyes, which is very difficult. And I think that there are instances in the painting where I feel lost and I have to make some small mark making that grounds me a little bit, that provides like anchor points where I can say, okay, that's like the lid, and I can feel comfortable because I finally found my drawing again. But I would say that the pulse that was driving this painting was hoping that I could break form down and just allow color to do its own thing. So it was almost like this blind hope that if you put the right shape of color against the right shape of color, their interaction can then translate into an idea of form. They can refer to something that then looks like a nose. They can refer to something that then gives you an idea of mouth. But I think I was painting, instead of a mouth, I was painting sort of mouthness, like concept of mouth. Instead of nose, I was painting noseness. And I know this is sounding ridiculous and super abstract, but I do think that when you are willing to push color, one attribute of color, which in my case is pushing the chroma part of color, the high chroma part of color, if you have what I consider to have like a balanced painting within my own work, and if you offset it and you put a lot of weight into the chroma aspect of it, it means that you have to sort of let go of the other things that were in check, that were in balance. For me, it meant just liberating myself a little bit from form and just not thinking constantly about making something turn or describing a notion of three-dimensionality. So it was just about almost like patchwork. It was just about color tiling. It was just about finding hopefully the right shapes with the right hues, with the right value, with the right drawing. So there's always like a ton of responsibility underneath that apparent freedom. But I think that that's what I was looking for, that's kind of like the sort of magic sauce that I was looking for in terms of the things that I see in SAINER's work. It's how can you liberate yourself from something where you're not really stepping into comfort zones, but you're stepping into unknown worlds and you're stepping into a very uncomfortable arena. How can you do that and still remain somewhat in control? How can you be reactive because you're in a new place and you want to learn about how you are answering to these new questions, but also how can you feel confidence and feel comfort in yourself because you know that there's a ton of fundamental aspects that you've worked really hard to attain that provide like a safety net. It's almost like a trust fall. You've got yourself, like you will hold yourself if you fall because you've worked hard to be there. So I think that's the painting that happened today with this painting of Dani. I think it was just a beautiful reminder of what lies beyond, at least beyond my world. I mean, the definition of beyond is very different for all of us and all of our careers. And that's what's most incredible about watching the development of any artist's career, the way they make decisions that take them into new directions and provide them with the energy to do, new and amazing work. And that makes us all better. Great work makes us all better as an artistic community. So we should always be grateful for people that are willing to take plunges. Yeah, so this was my effort. It was a kind of broken painting at moments. There were certainly moments where I was like, oh no, I've lost it. There was this willingness to give up form, but there's this panic mode that you enter into where you say, oh my God, give me some structure. Like I need something to fall back upon. But I think I found like a happy medium. And I think this was a little bit of a controlled risk. And I want to see myself taking a little more risks in the future with this What Can We Learn From series. I think it was a good step in the right direction. So that's going to be it for today. We'll see you next week because we're going to try to make this a weekly thing. So we'll see how that goes. Like I said, we're super happy to be back and we're super grateful to have an awesome community that has stuck by us in these 4 years. So we're going to be very happy doing a lot more of these in 2024. We'll see you next week. Bye.